I think I should stop there. I just am preparing the ground for later on, where you have these elements. I want to. There are other things happening on the continent too. I've only pointed out some of the central states and so on, but in many parts, and Congo also had this, the Kingdom of Congo, which we can talk about next week. But in many parts of the continent, there were no states, and there were societies without much hierarchy. They had no chiefs even. In the southern Sudan, for instance, and in parts of Kenya, you had very low levels of hierarchy, and no heads or rotating headships. So there was a variety of relationships of power and power dynamics and so on the continent. What we don't want you to say is that there was one African phenomenon, okay, either of great kingdoms or of chaos and anarchy and nothing. To always think in a far more subtle way about the continent, and which part of the continent are you talking, and when are you talking about. So when people tell you in Africa, you tell them, but where in Africa and when in Africa. Yeah. Okay? So you don't just make grand statements. And we say, well, yes, we'll go to the library and look at that. And that we'll find a documentation. So there's great diversity from highly organized societies with bureaucracies and writing, as in the case of Abyssinia and Morocco. The other thing is this, with colonization and the conquest after the 1800s, we're going to go into it. It wasn't the first time that African societies encountered white people or people from outside. At one point, we had dominated them, and then there was Chinese context, but not only that, there were all sorts of, look at the Mauritania and their belief in their connection to Spain, and they from the Moors and so on. So, okay. Any last questions before I run away, because I have to go and...
No, mine is not a question, it's sort of an opinion.
Yeah, okay, good.
Then I want to know what is the impact that the removal of African indigenous people to this Atlantic Ocean,
to the Americas.
Yeah. What is the impact that it has implemented to the continent? Because we see Africa as a place which is not more civilized than the Americas. And the European states, because there were no people at that time to develop the continent. Look, do you think the slavery has played a role in underdeveloping Africa?
Yeah. That's the argument of Walter Rodney. That definite role in underdeveloping Africa. The slavery did play that role. It's a very powerful argument, and in many ways convincing. On the other hand, there were beneficiaries of it amongst the elites and the powerful on the continent, who got something in return for every body that they sold. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it was an unequal exchange. It could never be equal to change a human being for somebody else. But what I am saying, there were beneficiaries. There were beneficiaries on the continent. And that's why it shows you can't simply say he or she is a black person and will support and will... people have their own interests, their material interests, and they will keep it to themselves and so on. And they'll do stuff for their own benefit. We can talk about this. We'll as we look later on at the impact of colonialism, we'll look at the impact of the slave trade also over the long term. Because we'll
Yeah, my point would be on the religion.
On the
religion. Religion.
Oh, religion.
Yeah. So what I want you to touch on is it's a issue of Christianity, the role that play on people. For instance, the role that play in Africa, where we came in Africa, it was a good role or it was a bad role? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we should.
Well, in the first place, as I told you, there's already Christianity in Africa long before the coming of colonialism and Christianity. Okay, so we must make a distinction between the earlier presence of Christianity in the case of Abyssinia. Okay. Huh?
I'm not talking about that.
Yeah, no, I know you're not talking about. I'm just saying that. And secondly, and the Kingdom of Congo. The king, one of the kings had converted to Christianity in the 1500s already. Okay, so there are a few cases here that is different to the dominant case of and the dominant case is of course the use by colonial powers, particularly the British, that they made of the church in furthering the colonial agenda. And I can give you lots of examples. And the church tried in some ways to be independent, and other ways was simply used by the colonial powers to do its dirty work and to quote unquote civilize by opening schools and so on. On the other hand, in many cases, the Africans made use of it and turned it to their own benefit. If we look at the history of the black intelligentsia in South Africa, they were produced on the mission stations and through the early Christian schools. Saul Plaatje and all these people, you know, they were all coming out of mission schools, educated in Christian fora and so on. So it's a very mixed situation. And in so many cases, outcomes can't be immediately and clearly predicted through these institutions, you know. So in many parts of the continent, because they spread literacy, it was also used by the nationalists in ways that the colonists didn't like. Okay, I don't know if that helped you. One last one here.
It was being similar to the one who was like, I was going to ask like who formed the religion based on like I hear like even in Africa there was a Christianity which was happening before the colonization.
Yeah, only in those parts, in Abyssinia and a bit in the Congo. Okay.
So
and then in the Cape, there were these mission stations that were established under the auspices of the Dutch and the British.
I was about to ask like.
But there wasn't any other way in which Christianity came. I don't know. Okay. Now, do you want to read something on the slave trade?
Yes.
You want to read something on the slave trade? At least it will give you some. Now, there's a reading there that I will have for you. You can do that. And then, what is very important to now that we're moving away from this is that with the ending of the slave trade, the abolition between 1804 and 1834, 1838, that period. So from early 1800s to the mid 1800s, there is the campaign to abolish slavery. It emerges out of Britain. And the abolitionist movement, William Wilberforce, and again coming out of the church to end this trade and to replace this trade with what is called legitimate trade. In other words, trade in goods and products and so on. And we'll look at that. And that's the beginning of the colonization that later on would happen. Because then companies would come in to take up, to go for the raw materials and so on.
Do you mean like there is a change of roles, like during the olden time, like you are forced to trade like illegal, but now it's legal.
They make the slave trade illegal. It still continues for a long time. Brazil only abolishes the slave trade in the late 19th century. So they have to try and steer away from the boats that come to police the traffic, the sea traffic, and look for slave and inspect for slaves. Slave trade continues for a long time, and on the continent itself, slavery is practiced for a long time. Into the 20th century, in Mauritania, for instance, into recent times, into the 1990s, they still practice slavery. Some forms of bondage.